March 7, 1945. Remagen, Germany. In the fading light along the Rhine River, young German women serving in auxiliary roles had long been warned that American soldiers were ruthless invaders, ready to unleash barbarity on the defeated. As the roar of Allied engines grew louder, these women clutched their uniforms, expecting shame and savagery in the wake of surrender. Yet across the last standing bridge, a quiet discipline awaited that would unravel the lies they had lived by. As shells whistled overhead and the ground shook from distant explosions, Anna Keller huddled in the dim corner of a makeshift communications office, her fingers trembling on the switchboard she had manned for months. The 22-year-old from Munich had joined the Helferinnen, a group of women trained to handle phone lines and radios for the Wehrmacht, straight out of her teenage years in the Bund Deutscher Mädel, the Nazi youth organization for girls. She believed every word of the broadcasts that painted the Americans as greedy thugs, weak in spirit but cruel in victory. Now, with the Ludendorff Bridge still miraculously intact despite German orders to destroy it, the end came swiftly. On that very day, troops from the U.S. 9th Armored Division reached the outskirts of Remagen and seized the bridge before demolition charges could fully bring it down, catching the defenders off guard. Over the next weeks, this unexpected crossing would lead to the capture of more than 100,000 German soldiers and auxiliaries in the region, turning the tide as Allied forces poured across the Rhine. For Anna, the reality hit like a cold wave when her unit's commander raised a white flag. The women were herded into lines, separated from the men for what she assumed would be their final indignity. Her heart pounded with a mix of defeat and dread, the propaganda echoing in her mind that these Yankees would treat them as spoils, stripping away not just their freedom, but their dignity. She thought of her family back home, scraping by on rations that grew thinner each day, and shame burned in her cheeks. How could the Reich, so promised as eternal, crumble like this? What stung deeper was the personal fracture. The ideology drilled into her since childhood. Prayers or silent vows of defiance as American soldiers moved methodically along the row. They had been marched a short distance from the bridge to a makeshift processing area in a cleared field just outside Remagen, where tents flapped like ghosts in the spring breeze and jeeps idled with engines humming low. Anna's mind raced with images from the newsreels she had seen. Americans as cigar-chomping bullies, looting and leering, their victory a license for unchecked fury against the pure German spirit. The propaganda had drilled it deep. These were men without honor, eager to degrade the women of the Reich as revenge for every bombed city. Now, as a sergeant with a clipboard barked orders in English, translating through a captured German officer, the women were separated into smaller groups. The men led one way and the auxiliaries another, toward a cluster of canvas shelters marked for females only. This was no whim. The United States had ratified the Geneva Convention of 1929, which required humane treatment for all prisoners of war, including special protections for women, like separate quarters, and searches conducted only by female personnel to ensure dignity and safety. In the chaotic weeks following Remagen's capture, forward camps like this one processed thousands, with the U.S. Army establishing temporary enclosures that held up to several hundred women auxiliaries at a time, all under strict rules to prevent mistreatment. For Anna, the separation felt like a prelude to isolation, her cheeks flushing with the hot shame of being catalogued like livestock, her uniform, once a badge of pride, now a mark of defeat that clung to her like mud. She had believed in the cause so fiercely, volunteering at 16 to serve the fatherland, convinced that Aryan women were the backbone of an unbreakable empire. Yet here,
In this line, under the watchful eyes of GIs who kept their distance and their rifles slung, the expected chaos didn't come. No rough hands, no mocking laughs, just forms being filled out with names and ranks, a process as orderly as a factory assembly. Her embarrassment twisted inward, mixing with the ideology that screamed this was all a trick, a momentary lull before the true horror. But what they didn't know yet was
a female medic in olive drab stepped forward to guide her into a nearby tent for the next step in their processing. The air smelled of antiseptic and damp earth, a far cry from the chaos Anna had braced for, as nurses worked in pairs, checking vital signs and noting down basics like height, weight, and any visible injuries on simple clipboards. No invasive grabs or humiliations, just quick pulses on wrists, temperatures under tongues, and questions translated by a bilingual orderly about fevers or wounds from the retreat. This routine medical exam was standard for all captured personnel under the Geneva Convention rules, which demanded prompt care to prevent disease in holding areas, and for women like the Helferinnen, it meant exams handled solely by female staff to protect modesty and avoid distress. In the days after Remagen, such forward processing tents near the Rhine saw hundreds of auxiliaries pass through, with the American Red Cross already on hand to supply bandages, soap, and even basic nutritional supplements to ease the shock of captivity. For Anna, who had heard tales of enemies stripping prisoners bare and leaving them to fester, this efficiency hit like a quiet thunder. Her uniform was checked for lice with a powder that itched but didn't demean, and a clean blanket was draped over her shoulders without a word of mockery. The shame from earlier lingered, twisting in her gut as she thought of how the Reich's own medics had rationed every aspirin while factories churned out weapons instead. She had been raised to see these Americans as undisciplined rabble, their society rotten with jazz and excess. Yet here they moved with a precision that mirrored the drills she knew from home, planting a tiny seed of confusion in the soil of her beliefs. Why offer water and warmth if they were the monsters the radio had sworn? Her mind flickered to the faces of her fellow women, some dabbing at tears, others staring blankly, all sharing this unspoken fracture between what they expected and what unfolded. But what they didn't grasp fully in that tent, amid the murmur of thermometers and the rustle of forms, was how these small acts of order would multiply into doubts that traveled with them. As the group was finally led toward waiting trucks for the longer journey, whispers began to ripple among the around. But it was the steady hum of the engines that kept her awake, a reminder of the distance pulling her from everything familiar. Anna leaned against a bulkhead, her blanket pulled tight, listening to the murmurs of fellow Helferinnen sharing scraps of stories from home. Families bartering jewelry for bread in bombed-out streets. Children going to bed hungry while propaganda posters promised victory. One woman from Berlin spoke of her mother's last letter, mentioning how ersatz coffee made from roasted acorns had become their daily ritual, a bitter brew that fooled no one anymore. These transports, repurposed Liberty ships and freighters, carried over 10,000 German prisoners monthly across the Atlantic in 1945, zigzagging to evade any lingering U-boats in what was now a one-sided ocean. Rations came 3 times a day, simple but abundant. Cans of corned beef or tuna, hard biscuits that didn't crumble like the rye bread back home, and packets of instant coffee that brewed strong and black with just hot water from the galley. For many, these meals marked the first real taste of the enemy's plenty. The Geneva Convention ensured prisoners ate the same as GIs, often over 3,000 calories daily, including luxuries like sugar cubes or margarine that civilians in Germany hadn't seen in years. Anna sipped her coffee slowly, the aroma sharp and unfamiliar, stirring a knot in her stomach, not just from the unfamiliar flavor,
but from the gnawing contrast to the hunger pangs she remembered from Munich, where lines for potatoes stretched blocks long. The Reich's broadcasts had mocked America as a land of starving masses, yet here was proof in a tin cup, eroding the myth of their own unyielding strength. Shame flickered again, not for the defeat, but for the blindness that let her believe such lies while her own people starved. Whispers grew as women compared notes. No beatings on this voyage, just guards who checked hammocks at night with flashlights, their boots echoing like distant thunder. In the dim lantern light, Anna wondered if this was all a dream, a trick to break their spirits slowly. But what they didn't realize, amid the sea's endless motion, was how these steady meals and quiet nights would widen the cracks,
Screamed threat. They were grouped with about 200 other female auxiliaries, a mix of helferinnen and secretaries from various units, all looking as dazed as she felt, and led to a processing hut where a sergeant in crisp fatigues waited with stacks of folded garments. Without fanfare, each woman was handed a bundle, a simple dress or slacks in soft wool blend, a blouse that smelled faintly of new starch, underwear neatly packaged, and a bar of soap wrapped in paper, the first real soap Anna had touched in months, not the gritty substitute made from coal tar that left her skin raw back home. Camp Hearne, one of over 30 such sites in Texas, held up to 4,800 German prisoners at its peak, including women separated into dedicated sections to maintain privacy and security. Daily rations followed the same standards as for U.S. troops, providing around 3,000 calories with items like canned fruit, fresh bread, and even chocolate bars from the Red Cross, luxuries that came weekly in parcels to supplement the base meals. For Anna, that soap became a quiet symbol, its clean suds lathering under spigots in the communal showers, where hot water flowed without rationing, washing away the grime of travel, but stirring a deeper unease. She had always seen cleanliness as a mark of German order, superior to the dirty Allies. Yet here it was handed freely, without the lectures on saving every drop for the war effort. Shame crept in as she rinsed her hair, thinking of her sister in Munich scrubbing clothes in cold streams, while this enemy camp offered towels and combs as if abundance were ordinary. The dress fit loosely but comfortably, a far cry from her threadbare uniform burned in a pit upon arrival, and as she buttoned it, the fabric's softness mocked the hardship she had endured for the fatherland. Whispers spread among the women in the bunkhouse, stories of delousing powders that didn't sting, and beds with actual mattresses, not straw pallets infested with fleas. This plenty, so casually given, chipped at the edges of her pride, making her question if the Reich's scarcity was strength or just a lie they had all swallowed. But what they didn't see coming in those first sunlit days was how the routines would peel back even more. Breakfast assignments came. For Anna, it was the laundry detail, sorting piles of linens and uniforms into hampers, then hauling them to the steam-powered washers that churned with a steady rumble. The work felt familiar, yet strange, like her old duties, but without the rush of air raid warnings interrupting every load. Women in her group folded sheets under the watchful eye of a female overseer, a Red Cross volunteer who explained tasks in broken German, showing how to use the iron without scorching the fabric. In U.S. POW camps like Hearne, daily routines mirrored military life, with roll calls twice a day and work options presented voluntarily to keep idle hands from trouble. Labor was not forced. The Geneva Convention prohibited it for non-officers without pay, and female auxiliaries earned about 80 cents a day for tasks like laundry or kitchen help, money saved in camp accounts for use after release. Anna's hands grew sore from scrubbing, but the soap lathered freely, and breaks came on schedule with a whistle, not whim. Guards patrolled the perimeter, male figures keeping a respectful distance from the women's area, their rifles at rest and eyes forward. No wandering stares or crude jokes that the propaganda had warned would come. This space, this unseen barrier, challenged the horrors Anna had been taught to expect, where defeat meant violation and loss beyond measure. She caught herself glancing at the fences less with terror, more with a budding confusion, wondering why these men, painted as beasts, acted with such restraint. The payslip at week's end, a few coins in an envelope, felt absurdly normal, a touch of fairness that mocked the unpaid toil she knew from home. Bonds formed in the steam-filled room, women sharing quiet laughs over a stubborn stain, the routine weaving a fragile normalcy. But what they didn't fully sense in those sweat-soaked hours was how the guards' steady presence would amplify the inner questions stirring within. A small gesture from a nurse deepened the rift, as she bandaged a fellow worker's cut without question or scorn. An American woman in uniform approached the laundry line, her arms laden with a stack of envelopes and parcels stamped with a red cross, calling out names in careful English that a translator turned. International groups made sure such aid reached all prisoners, delivering over 1 million packages a year across U.S. camps, each one carrying not just food, but notes that reminded the women of lives paused back in Europe. Anna's letter spoke of ration lines lengthening in Munich, her sister's cough worsening without medicine, words that hit like stones in her chest. Yet here, amid the kindness of a stranger sorting mail without a trace of spite, the old stories of American cruelty felt thinner, like fog burning off under the Texas sun. She had been taught that the enemy hoarded everything for themselves, leaving captives to rot in silence. But this envelope, postmarked weeks ago, proved otherwise, a thread to home that propaganda said would be severed forever. The shame of her captivity mingled with a reluctant gratitude, cracking the shell of superiority she had worn like armor, making her wonder if the Reich's isolation had blinded them all to basic human decency. As the distribution wrapped up, Harlan switched on a small radio in the common room, tuning to shortwave broadcasts from neutral Switzerland that read headlines, "Allied advances, German retreats, no triumphs for the fatherland, but no outright lies either." Women clustered around, some nodding, others with eyes downcast, the flat voices painting a world where defeat loomed without the heroic spin they knew. This glimpse, so straightforward and unfiltered, widened the rift inside Anna, her beliefs trembling like the paper in her fist. But what they didn't share openly in the afternoon light was how these connections would haunt the quieter hours. Nights brought private turmoil, as Anna lay awake in her bunk, memories clashing with the present. In the barracks, Anna lay awake under the steady glow of electric bulbs that cast a soft light across the wooden beams, memories clashing with the present like waves against the ship's hull she had left behind. The camp fell quiet after lights out, save for the occasional creak of bunks and the distant call of nightbirds. But sleep evaded her as she unfolded her mother's letter once more by the dim ray filtering through a high window. The words painted a grim picture. Munich streets choked with rubble from rage that left amplified the ache. Fresh bread in the mornings, loaves baked daily in the camp ovens with flour that never ran short, and lights that burned all night without fear of blackout curfews or rationed bulbs. Back home, her family scavenged for candle stubs, enduring hours of darkness to save power for the war machine, while here, the glow mocked their sacrifices, highlighting how the Reich's vaunted efficiency had crumbled under its own weight. Shame settled heavy in her chest, not just for the defeat, but for the faith she had poured into a system that left her people in ruins, while this enemy fed her nightly with slices thicker than a week's allotment. She thought of the propaganda posters showing Americans as hollow men, yet their electric grids spanned continents, powering homes and camps alike without the flicker of doubt. The contrast gnawed, fostering a quiet unraveling, her ideological certainties fraying like the hem of her old uniform. Why had no one spoken of this strength, this steady plenty that made the fatherland's hunger seem not noble, but foolish? As the night deepened, Anna pressed the letter to her heart, tears silent on her pillow. But what they didn't voice in the shared silence of the barracks was how dawn's routines would stir even deeper unrest. A shared meal pushed her toward revelation as the women gathered for breakfast, passing the breadbasket with newfound questions in their eyes. Around a table of canned fruit in the common room, the women began to speak freely, their voices low but steady as they spooned slices of peaches from tin bowls that gleamed under the afternoon light. Anna sat among them, the sweet juice a stark reminder of orchards she had seen only in paintings, as a fellow Helferinnen named Greta from Hamburg recalled life before the war. Markets where bread lines formed at dawn, butter swapped for coal in hushed trades. Another, Liesel from the Ruhr, described factories belching smoke, while families mended clothes with thread from unraveling socks. No new garments since ration cards dwindled to whispers. These talks flowed naturally after the library sessions, where shelves held over 5,000 books in German and English, from novels by banned authors to histories of democracy that challenged the old narratives. In U.S. propaganda had twisted hunger into virtue while hiding the Allies' quiet might. Greta shared a pre-war tale of her father's job lost to machines, contrasting it with the camp's voluntary work paying fair wages, eroding the myth of American chaos. This exchange, pieced from letters and radio snippets, shattered the veil of invincibility, leaving them with a shared ache for the truths glossed over. One event sealed the transformation, as Anna faced her own hearing before a board that saw her not as foe, but as someone deserving of choice. Before a board in the camp's administrative hut, Anna faced questions not of guilt, but of her future, sitting straight-backed in a wooden chair under the whir of a ceiling fan that stirred the humid air. The panel consisted of 2 officers and a civilian from the War Department, their faces neutral as they flipped through her file, asking in translated English about her skills from the Helferinnen days, typing, radio operation, and whether she had family waiting in Munich or perhaps ties to the party beyond her youth group. No accusations flew, no demands for confessions of atrocities. Instead, they outlined options: repatriation to a rebuilding Germany by summer's end, or temporary work release in America for farms or factories, with pay and protections under the same rules that had governed her time here. By 1946, 90% of the female prisoners like Anna had been sent home, their hearings a final step in denazification questionnaires that screened for high-level involvement but offered second chances for those deemed low risk, many later sharing in memoirs the quiet fairness that left them unsettled. Anna's voice trembled as she answered, the words tumbling out about her mother's letters pleading for news. Yet her mind reeled at the dignity extended. No chains, no scorn, just forms to sign for passage on a ship bound east. This was the peak of her shock, confronting the full weight of the lies from her upbringing. The Reich had drilled in her that Americans were subhuman opportunists, their society a degenerate pit. But here they sat, offering choices with the respect of equals. The illusion shattered completely in that room. Defeat not born on the Rhine's banks, but in the factories and schools that outproduced and outthought the fatherland long before the first shell fell. Disillusionment washed over her, weaving new threads into the fabric of their lives. As freedom neared with papers stamped and trunks packed, Anna pondered the woman she had become, tracing the lines of her face in a small mirror that caught the golden Texas sunset. The final days in Camp Hearne unfolded in a haze of goodbyes, women clustering in the common room to exchange addresses scrawled on ration wrappers, promises to right amid hugs that spoke of bonds forged in unexpected soil. Anna walked the paths one last time, past the laundry where hands once trembled with doubt, now steady with a quiet resolve. Bidding farewell to Greta, who chose the seamstress job nearby, and Liesel, who eyed the horizon toward home. These choices marked the end of captivity, with repatriation ships waiting at ports to carry most back by late 1945. But for a few, paths diverged permanently. Around 5,000 former prisoners, including some women auxiliaries, later emigrated to the U.S. under denazification programs that vetted and welcomed those cleared of deep party ties, offering visas for work or family in a land that had shown mercy. Anna's hearing had cleared her as a mere follower, her youth group days noted but not damning, yet the offer to stay hung in her thoughts like a half-forgotten dream. From the shame of surrender, she had journeyed to a reluctant gratitude, the old hatred dissolving in the face of daily kindnesses that rebuilt her psyche without the poison of ideology. No longer did she see Americans as foes, but as people whose order and fairness had mirrored the decency the Reich had denied its own. Her reflections turned inward during those last evenings, piecing together a self unburdened by the myths that once defined her, ready to face Germany's ruins with eyes wide open. Boarding the ship home days later, clarity settled over her like a calm sea, the horizon blending old wounds with new possibilities. The Atlantic stretched ahead, but Anna's world had shrunk to truths learned on distant shores, as the ship cut through familiar waves, carrying her back to a Europe forever changed. She stood at the rail, wind tugging at her hair, clutching a small chocolate wrapper folded in her pocket, a memento from one of the Red Cross, a reminder that humanity persisted beyond battle lines. No longer chained to the Reich's illusions, she felt the weight lift with each mile, the ocean washing away the last stains of shame, leaving space for a humbled rebuild. For Anna, the war's true cost lay not in the ruins of cities or the ache of separation, but in the shattered illusions that had divided hearts long before the first shots rang out, leaving her with a quieter, wiser view of the world and its shared frailties. If stories like Anna's resonate with you, consider subscribing for more untold chapters from history's quieter battles.